Alright, so I'm just going to give an update on the MaxScript update to the FCV. Um, I made some changes that affect the interconnection with Son of Persia's SMD and Legal Souls exporter because it uses the original coordinate system, whereas their uh, output, when it's brought into 3ds Max, it somehow gets modified, and the model is sitting upright, which means the coordinate system was modified at some point. I don't know where it had been modified, maybe through Wonderboy's import plugin, I don't know. But anyway, I have more control of the MaxScript to directly import data directly from the game's files. So I chose not to modify the coordinate systems until I had a better understanding of how everything was working. So that meant that I had to change anything existing that was working with Son of Persia's imported model, and then I had to, and then improve from those functions from there. So this version is, it's not on the top surface, doesn't look like it changed that much. It hasn't really. Most of the changes have been under the hood. So I'll just make that clear. Although all these changes are not in vain, the difference between Son of Persia's tool and Legal Souls tool is that both those projects are closed source, which means that we can't change them, we can't update them, and they've abandoned those projects. We can't contact them, we can't get them to update things. The MaxScript is plain text. You can open it up at any point, and it can be changed. It can be updated. You can give it to somebody who knows what they're doing, and they can change things, which I'm very proud of. This gives the community a way of growing, and so I hope you'll appreciate that as well. Okay, so let's go through the changes. I also want to give a UI overview because I don't think I gave that. People are asking, for example, Biohazard is asking, what are these parameter things? I don't know what this is. So I'll explain this a little bit better in depth and hopefully clarify what the UI is doing and what the format is doing. So I'm just going to give a simple example of just drawing a box here. Okay, and let's say I wanted to animate the box. We would do this simply in a 3D editor by moving the time slider somewhere and hitting auto or to record the animation. And then you just make a change. So I can change the box over here. And now when I slide through the timeline, the box will change. It'll go from one state to another state, right? In addition to this state changing, they also add a thing called interpolation. So I'll show you the difference with interpolation. Interpolation is the ability to take, oh, it's still doing it, hold up. Delete that and that. Change that there we go. Sorry about that. Change that somewhere and we'll do this. So you see now that the box is moving from one value to another value. It's transitioning from one state to another state. This is using a thing called interpolation, where the software is calculating a path from one value to another value. So that's important to understand. We currently do not understand the relationship in Resident Evil that does this interpolation. We see additional values in the FCV which are unknown. These values may control the interpolation. The interpolation is a little bit more complex. You can actually create Bezier curves to further tailor and customize the movement of your interpolation, like how the interpolation works under the hood. So we're not going to get really into that, but that is one of the aspects that we don't understand. But I just want to get one other point across here. These things in the timeline, these dots, these are what we call keyframes. They're essentially a animation attribute which is associated with this object. So right now I am doing a translation. I'm moving the box along the x-axis only, and that is being saved as an attribute on the timeline. This doesn't have to always be a attribute for moving the box. We can also add like a modifier, or we can change settings in the UI which will then affect the box overall. The same thing is done in Blender. You can add a driver to virtually anything, and this will be you'll be able to record this as an animation and change it during the duration of the time slider. So you need to understand that what we're looking at in the FCV is attribute data. It could be anything. It could be the intensity of a light, for example. It could be something moving or rotating, of course, but it can also be many other things. So we need to keep that in mind. So when I'm talking about unknown parameters, we're essentially talking about keyframes, which are animation attributes, which we don't fully understand how they affect the model overall. Okay, so with that being said, let's talk about the UI and how that's going to work. So hit open. I'm going to load up this WEP. This is a file from when Leon is in the menu. In here we have the attributes on the left. There's two pieces of information shown here with the attribute. That is the bone ID, which is associated with the attribute. It's not really a bone ID, it's more like a object ID, but most often it will be bones. But it can also be, as we know, cameras and even lights. These IDs can link to any scene object. Okay. Next is the attribute type. The attribute type can be modified by selecting an animation attribute and then changing the type down below here. So we have two known types that we sort of understand. Type 2 is a rotation, and type 4 is a movement or translation. So you can click on that, you can see that we can change it in the view. So there are basic keys, and there's some keys that we just don't understand, or attributes that we don't understand. Now I've made it to the point where you guys can go and just play around with this, right? So this script came out like last year. I wrote this like a year ago. This is nothing new. This editor was here before. So you guys could have always come in here and just mess around with it. So it's really important that if you have free time, come in here and mess around with it. If you can figure out what these other types do, that'll put us leagues ahead, because right now we only know a little small portion of what it does. All right, on top of the type, the data that gets generated can be packed in a more compact method by using the storage type or the data type. The only type that we understand right now is the float point type, which is type 0, and the integer type, which is type 50. Those are the only two packing types that we understand. This type is extremely critical, because if it goes to a type that we don't understand, the data cannot be interpreted or it can't be written correctly. So to be safe, you always want to keep it in the float point type, because that's the only one we understand if you're generating new data. Right? Of course, if you're in here, you can also modify the object index. You can just use this slider. So these sliders here, 1, 2, 3, relate to the animation attributes, as well as at any point you can delete a attribute or add a new attribute that you can then further go and change or modify. You can also add additional frames within that attribute. Then now that leads us into the right column. The right column represents the updates of that attribute along the time slider. Okay, so of course we're going to be within the timeline. So the top box at the top here represents the total length of the timeline. Of course, these frames should fit within the timeline, so between 0 and 90. So if we look at another attribute here, you can see it ranges from 0 to 90 within that time range. Okay. Now these updates, they will have changes to the values. So as we click from one to another, you'll see that down here things are changing. So these represent the values associated with each attribute. Each attribute will store a X, Y, and Z component. These are typically something like the X, Y, and Z for position or rotation. Now, each one of these values contains 4 channels of data. Again, we don't know what these do. These may relate to the interpolation mechanism, which we don't currently understand. So for the most part, you're going to null these numbers out by typing in 0, and you're only going to type in your value into the value 1 box, ignoring box 2, 3, and 4. Okay. Now, the FCV format supports additional optimizations by allowing you to exclude or include one of the 3 components. So if you don't utilize an X value, then you don't save it. For example, in the previous example, I moved a box from side to side, only utilizing the X axis. Therefore, I don't need to include the Z or Y because they're just wasting space. So that's what this is. You can go in here, you can enable or disable, basically deleting or including that data within the FCV for that update for the attribute. And that's it. That's the management interface. I hope that was a decent overview. And now we'll get into the new aspects that were added. Now, going back to the last video where we're talking about, copying animations and all this kind of stuff, these were helper functions. These have now been pushed to the bottom. They may not work as effectively before as things have been updated and changed. So we're just going to be focusing on the new updates. But please feel welcome to bug report or report anything that's not working correctly, or you think needs to be improved, or you have an idea about improvement. You can share that. All right, so if you right click on here, you can load a skeleton. So we're going to go and load Leon's skeleton. So you can see Leon's skeleton is now imported here. Right now the import only supports just the skeleton, not the mesh. You can also load now an animation in here. It's the same as just doing the method that we did with the open button. Once the animation is here, you can right click and then you can apply an animation. And now you can scrub through the timeline. You can see the animation playback. If there's a glitch or something like this, this is typically related to something that you changed. So we were playing around in here, so we actually should probably reload the animation clip, and we'll reapply the animation. Actually, does it actually reapplied it? No, actually, I think we need to rebuild the skeleton. So let's go do that. So we're gonna load. Keep losing my folders here. PL00 bin. There it goes. T-posed again. No keyframes on them anymore. And we're going to apply that animation. Now it should be working, right? Right. Now all that is kind of tedious, loading the bin and then getting the skeleton and then loading that. So there have been some functions that are combined to make it easier. So, for example, this load and apply will do both the load and the apply operation in one go. So we can load this other animation, for example, automatically apply it. Sometimes it's a hassle to keep loading the bin file. So there is a automatic build and apply. So I'm going to build a new skeleton, and it will just apply the FCV to this. So whatever I load in, for example, I load this one back, I can just go build, and it will just apply this to a pre-built skeleton that is hard-coded into the Mac script. So this skeleton is Leon's PL00 skeleton. It's just automatically included with the Mac script, so it's easy to test with his animation set. So the things we have are just basic management things. You can add, I think I mentioned this already, but you can add, copy, paste, and delete an attribute between files, even if you wanted to. So if we had an issue with a particular attribute, we can copy it between files. I may be able to show that in the demo when we test one of these. So yeah, let's go ahead and change something, I suppose. So we have the capture animation function, which will take the bones from the scene and then put it back in the FCV. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate that now. So let's say we have an animation that we imported, and let's say we want to make a modification to it. So we'll just take one of these bones, delete the existing keyframes for it. We'll go into animation mode, and we'll set this keyframe, and then we'll make a change. So, I don't know. Have them go like look up. Oh yeah, I'll just have them look up the sky or something. I don't know. Something like that. Yeah, let's go with that. And I'll save. Take that out of there. So it should make a change in the game. And so now we can capture this and put it back to the FCV. Now, because there could be glitches or problems with certain bones, they may require additional attributes that we don't understand, such as something that helps with rotation constraints, like an inverse kinetics or something like that. So it could be possible that if you export all of the bone keys or the keyframes for the bones, there might still be glitches. So to add a level of control, you're able to just make a selection and then just capture that selection. So here we have the two bones selected, only two of them were packed into the FCV. Of course, if you're not concerned about that, just unselect everything and then just do a capture and it will just do everything, okay, if you don't want to bother with the selection. Okay. Now these are in here, you can just go ahead and save. So save that over here and we'll test this in the game. Okay, so you can see there is a clear problem with Leon's body. He seems to be like glitching out or something. Okay, which is entirely possible. There's a lot of things we still don't yet understand. So let's say I just want to take this bone because I just want to preserve that animation that I made. I can do it this way. I can look at the bone, which is 0, 2. I can look at it in the attribution list, and I know that 2 is a rotation, so I want to keep that. So let's say I go and I copy this, and I can then open up the original again. And at bone 2, I can paste over top of it. Yeah, so right. We can go ahead and save that now to our custom 2. Test that in the game. And you should rotate. Yes, there we go. So we eliminated or factored out some of those errors by just taking or capturing the one rotation that we wanted to keep. Okay. That just gives you another layer of control. Oops, Windows all messed up here. Which is that you can, export or capture a selection, or if that's further causing issues, you can copy and paste these attributes between files to further help isolate problems. Okay. So yeah, this is very still work in progress, but the goal was to be able to import an animation to a skeleton, tweak the skeleton, and export it back. For the most part, that does seem to work. In a margin of caution and trial and error, it does seem to work in my testing. So that's the update that I've made. So hopefully that explained that quite well. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll try to get to it or add some other functionality. All right, thank you for watching. Take care. Bye.